What you're about to see has never happened before at a British state summit. Trump pointed his finger at the Royal Guard and told his security to remove him from the frame. But the guard didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. So why did Trump suddenly stop and break protocol with a salute no one saw coming? This moment nearly violated centuries of ceremonial tradition. And what happened next silenced an entire crowd. Watch closely, because the guard doesn't move an inch. Now, before we reveal the full story, first, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The April morning air had that particular London crispness, bright, dry, but carrying the low hum of spring tension in its bones. Lancaster House stood dignified behind black iron railings, the Union Jack fluttering gently above its stately entrance. Inside, silver trays were being polished, briefing folders stacked neatly in rows, and security swept the corridors for the fifth time that hour. A joint diplomatic summit was underway. US and UK officials gathered to discuss defence posture, ceremonial continuity, and the ever-ambiguous language of statecraft. It was supposed to be predictable, orderly, British. Outside, stationed beneath the stone arch nearest the front colonnade, Lance Corporal Hugh Mercer stood silent and unshifting. The 35-year-old Grenadier Guard had been on ceremonial detail since dawn, his red wool tunic immaculate, his bearskin cap level and casting shadow across a face carved by time and Afghanistan's sun. His posture didn't shift, not even as black cars began pulling up in sequence, Jaguars, Range Rovers, and finally the hulking shape of a midnight blue Cadillac. The last one didn't belong on the schedule. "Is that?" one aide began. It was. The door opened, and out stepped Donald J. Trump. No one had been told he was coming, certainly not this early, not without full security coordination. But there he was, adjusting his tie, gesturing broadly as he made his way toward the entrance, like he owned the building. His staff trailed him, Secret Service agents, press aides, and a camera operator already filming. He paused halfway to the doors. The cameras panned past him, catching Hugh in frame, motionless, rifle at rest, boots glinting in the sun. Trump stopped walking. "Do we need this guy standing there?" he said loudly, turning to one of his staffers. "It looks like I'm visiting a wax museum." A few members of the American press chuckled. Some of the British staff didn't. Protocol didn't allow removing a stationed guard during an active ceremonial rotation, especially not at a listed state property, and especially not for optics. Trump waved vaguely toward the guard. "Seriously, get him out of the shot. I want the building, not the tin soldier." One of his security detail, a clean-cut man in mirrored sunglasses, began walking toward Hugh's position. From the edge of the building, a steward hesitated, glancing at a clipboard. "That guard's he's not decorative," she murmured under her breath. The Secret Service agent didn't slow. He walked up to within 3 paces of Hugh's ceremonial rope line and raised a hand, as if about to gesture. Hugh didn't blink, didn't even glance in the man's direction. People began to watch now. Journalists, junior diplomats, even a few senior staff from the UK's delegation peering through the foyer windows. The atmosphere shifted like a sudden change in wind direction. The agent stopped, just shy of the rope, unsure of the exact boundary he was about to cross. Behind him, Trump sighed loudly. "This is why nothing gets done in this country. Everything's about protocol." He turned to his comms director and pointed toward a shaded corner of the colonnade. "Take the shot from over there instead. I don't want him in the background." The moment had stretched. The silence had thickened, and through it all, Lance Corporal Hugh Mercer did what he'd done for 19 years in uniform. He stood. The moment hadn't ended, but something had shifted, quietly, beneath the surface. And the next few minutes would test not just the discipline of a ceremonial guard, but the weight of a tradition one man thought he could wave aside like an inconvenience. Hugh Mercer had learned stillness long before the scarlet wool ever touched his shoulders. He learned it in Helmand, crouched behind a sun-bleached Hesco wall, watching the dust settle from a near miss that should have ended them all. He learned it standing beside the ramp of a Chinook after a midnight medevac, his hands still trembling beneath his gloves, willing them to stop before the lieutenant noticed. And he learned it again, differently, years later in Windsor, during the slow, methodical training every new guardsman endures. Hours upon hours of stillness. Boredom weaponized into discipline. Silence sharpened into an art form. By the time he arrived at Lancaster House that morning, He didn't need to think about how to stand. His body knew. He hadn't planned on being a career guardsman. But after 2 tours overseas, after burying 3 mates who deserved more time, the ceremonial post had felt like a kind of armour, a way to serve without the noise, a way to guard something that wasn't just a convoy or a perimeter, but history itself. His grandfather would have understood. Sergeant Harold Mercer had stood in the very same uniform outside Windsor Castle in 1952, the day Queen Elizabeth ascended the throne. There was a photo of him tucked inside Hugh's locker. Same cap, same stance, same unshakable stare. Different wars, same weight. That weight felt heavier now, with eyes on him. Not the respectful stares of tourists, but the impatient glare of a former American president who saw him as an obstacle to a better camera angle. From the edge of the crowd, a British press officer whispered urgently into her radio, trying to confirm who had cleared the visit. No one had. Trump had called it a spontaneous cultural stop, code likely for a PR stunt. And yet it was working. Cameras were rolling. Sound bites were forming. "Get him out of the frame," Trump muttered again, now more irritated. "Why is he even here? Who needs a guy in a bearskin hat just standing around like a store mannequin?" A couple of his entourage laughed. One aide smirked toward the cameras. Hugh didn't react, not visibly, but inside something stirred. Not anger. He'd been called worse, ignored harder, and stood silent through more painful moments than this. What stirred was memory. His grandfather again, telling him on the back porch in Lancashire that the job of a royal guard wasn't to intimidate or impress. "It's to remind people," he'd said. "Remind them that this country stands, that some things don't blink." When Hugh's father died, it was his grandfather who taught him how to wear black shoes like they meant something, who ironed his first dress shirt before his secondary school interview, who showed him how to stand at attention before teaching him how to fight. So when a billionaire from across the ocean, one who built towers out of his own name, pointed at that legacy like it was an inconvenience, Hugh's silence took on new meaning. He wasn't just refusing to move, he was reminding. The agent who had approached earlier now lingered back near the Cadillac, uncertain. Even Trump's own team seemed unsure how far they could push. The British staff were whispering, clearly uncomfortable, none of them wanting to be the one to say no and risk the fallout. Inside Lancaster House, the official meetings waited, but outside, on that wide stone landing flanked by centuries of ceremony, the standoff held. A few onlookers, sensing something beyond politics, had stopped chatting and simply watched. A mother lifted her daughter onto her hip to see over the crowd. A tourist lowered his phone. They didn't know Lance Corporal Hugh Mercer, didn't know where he'd served or what he'd seen, but in that moment they saw what he stood for. And the man trying to move him? He was about to learn what happens when silence refuses to be dismissed. The tension had thickened, settling into the space like damp London fog, clinging to collars, crawling under lapels, making every breath feel heavier. The kind of tension that doesn't burst, but coils, waiting for someone to pull too hard on the wrong thread. Trump was growing visibly impatient. He hadn't expected resistance, not from a uniformed man who hadn't spoken a word or moved a muscle, not from aides who kept deferring to protocol as if it were more powerful than the office he once held, and certainly not from a ceremonial culture he believed was decorative at best. He leaned toward one of his agents, shaved head, clean jaw, the kind of man who looked like he'd been issued straight from Quantico, and muttered under his breath, "Tell him to move, quietly. No scene." The agent nodded, adjusted his cuff, and stepped forward again. But he wasn't the only one moving. From the left side of the colonnade, a woman in a dark skirt suit emerged. Late 50s, neat grey hair pulled back, tablet in hand. Her name tag read, Ms. Olivia Dalton, Director of Ceremonial Coordination. She moved like someone who knew exactly where she belonged and who didn't need to announce it. She intercepted the agent with a single, practiced motion, placing herself between him and the rope line. Her voice never rose above conversational volume. "Sir, I must ask you to stop there." The agent blinked. "I've been asked." "I'm sure you have, but this is an active ceremonial post under Ministry of Defence jurisdiction. The Guard is not permitted to move without an official signal, and certainly not at the request of a foreign delegation." He hesitated. "It's a simple repositioning. It would be a violation of military code and an international embarrassment." International embarrassment. Trump, seeing the stall, called from behind, "Problem?" Ms. Dalton turned calmly to face him, hands folded behind her back. "No problem, Mr. President. just preserving centuries of military tradition, as per the joint agreement that governs ceremonial protocol at British state properties. She smiled thinly. I'd be happy to direct your camera crew to a better angle. Trump's jaw clenched, the way it did when he felt boxed in. He stepped forward again, this time walking closer to Hugh than before, crossing over the invisible threshold most guests instinctively respected. He stared up at him, eyes scanning the stillness like it was a challenge. "What happens if I touch your hat?" he asked, only half joking. Hugh didn't blink. Trump leaned in slightly. "Or what if I wave this in your face?" He held up a press badge, dangling it inches from Hugh's unmoving eyes. "Do you even blink, soldier?" The silence grew louder. A woman near the rope line gasped softly. A staffer turned his back, pretending to check his phone, and then, "Enough!" The words sliced through the air like a sabre. Everyone turned. From the far end of the stone steps, a tall man in a charcoal coat stepped into view. Military bearing, silver hair, walking with the calm purpose of someone long past the age of needing to prove anything. General Alistair Lockridge, retired, former head of the Household Division, now senior consultant to the Crown on ceremonial matters. He didn't shout. He didn't quicken his pace. He simply approached. Trump, momentarily caught off guard, straightened instinctively. Something about the general's presence demanded posture. Lockridge didn't look at him. He looked at Hugh. "You may speak freely, guardsman." It was not a question. And for the first time in the entire exchange, slowly, deliberately, Hugh turned his head. Just slightly, just enough. The audience held its breath. And in the calm, unwavering voice of someone who had stood through sandstorms and salutes, funerals and false smiles, Lance Corporal Hugh Mercer said, "This uniform doesn't serve the camera, sir. It serves the country." The silence that followed was absolute. Trump's mouth opened, but no words came, because in that moment, even he recognized what had just happened. The pause that followed Hugh Mercer's words seemed to stretch the entire length of the colonnade. Cameras, mid-tilt, froze. Eyebrows lifted. Someone coughed and immediately regretted it. Even the pigeons on the ledges above Lancaster House went still, as if sensing that something sacred had just been said. Trump squinted, tilting his head like he hadn't heard right, or maybe like he wasn't used to hearing no, especially not from men who didn't speak unless ordered. His security detail lingered awkwardly beside him, caught between protocol and instinct. Somewhere behind the crowd, a journalist's lens clicked once, then lowered with reverent slowness. Hugh said nothing more. He didn't need to. He returned to position, eyes forward, posture unshaken. But something in the air had changed. The moment had not erupted. It had deepened. Trump looked back at General Lockridge, still standing nearby with the kind of expression that didn't change, only solidified. "You let them talk now?" Trump asked, voice half sarcastic. Lockridge didn't flinch. "When they have something worth saying." Trump narrowed his eyes. "Bit dramatic, don't you think?" Lockridge offered a faint, British half-shrug. "Sometimes dignity is mistaken for drama, usually by men who've never carried it." There was no venom in his tone, just truth. Trump turned away abruptly, gesturing toward his cameraman. "Take it from the other side. Forget the statue." The press operator hesitated. "You sure, sir?" "I said forget him." But even as he said it, something in his posture changed. He was still puffed up, still grumbling, but quieter now. Like the room had shifted, and he was trying to catch up without admitting he'd tripped. Then, almost as if to reclaim momentum, he strode closer again, until he stood just beyond the rope line, no more than 3 feet from Hugh's boot. "You served, huh?" he asked. No response. "Afghanistan?" Stillness. Trump clicked his tongue and rocked back slightly on his heels. "Tough place. Lost some good guys over there. He paused. I didn't dodge the draft, by the way. I had bone spurs, real ones. People forget that. He said it like he was trying to recover his footing in front of a crowd that hadn't moved. But they had, emotionally, if not physically. Because the man they had mocked, ignored, or considered part of the backdrop had reminded everyone that stillness wasn't silence, it was strength. A moment passed, then Trump did something no one quite expected. He straightened. Not dramatically, just enough that his jacket aligned properly over his midsection, that his hands dropped to his sides, and that his chin lifted 1/2 inch. A practiced politician's pivot. He turned back to Hugh and muttered, just loud enough to carry, "You win this round, soldier." Then, with a surprising flick of his right hand, brief, not quite formal but unmistakable, he brought it to his temple. A salute. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't protocol, but it was there. The American press missed it, but the British didn't. Ms. Dalton, still standing at the edge of the landing, blinked once. Slowly. General Lockridge's jaw didn't move, but his eyes narrowed just slightly. Trump dropped his hand like nothing had happened. "All right," he said louder, "let's get this thing rolling." And with that, he moved on, toward the stairs, the cameras, the staging area. But the ripple he'd left behind, that stayed. People began to murmur, not in outrage or offence, in surprise, in quiet disbelief. "He saluted him," someone whispered. "A real salute. Not a full one, but yeah." At the back of the press crowd, a junior staffer for the Foreign Office stood frozen with his mouth slightly open. He didn't know what protocol book this belonged to, but he knew he'd just seen something unscripted. And real. Meanwhile, Hugh remained still, the moment having passed through him like wind through banners. He did not shift. He did not react. But behind the calm, the silence now had a weight to it. A new stillness. One that didn't just represent tradition. It had won. Minutes later, the event resumed. The press conference moved inside. The cameras rolled. The usual volley of diplomatic phrases echoed through polished rooms. But outside, the forecourt remained changed. The man in red was still standing. The one who tried to move him had left the frame. And the photograph everyone would remember wasn't the one taken inside. It was the one that never needed a caption. A soldier holding his ground while the most powerful man in the world blinked first. The summit continued. Inside Lancaster House, polished shoes clicked across marble floors, diplomats exchanged practiced handshakes, and silver coffee pots clinked against bone china saucers. A dozen cameras rolled without incident, capturing statements that would later be distilled into headlines that said very little. But outside, on that stone landing where centuries of stillness had collided with one moment of spoken truth, the atmosphere lingered. Hugh Mercer remained at his post, untouched by the commotion unfolding behind the gilded windows. The American delegation had moved on, and the press had been herded indoors, but a few stragglers, staff, junior attachés, civilians with the right clearance, still milled nearby, and they were all watching him. He hadn't moved since his sentence. He wouldn't. Not until the shift ended. That's when Trump reappeared. The summit had paused for a brief photo line. Aides were repositioning flags and confirming schedules, but Trump stepped out unescorted, adjusting his cufflinks and scanning the forecourt. He walked toward the colonnade alone this time, slower, more measured. The crowd noticed. Phones subtly reappeared, no one spoke. Trump stopped about 10 feet from Hugh. He didn't say anything at first, just looked. Not the stare of mockery anymore. Something closer to calculation or maybe consideration. Then, almost like a man trying on humility for size, he spoke. "You didn't blink," he said. "Not once." No response. Trump exhaled. "You know, people think this stuff is easy. Standing still, looking the part. But it's not. It's presence." He glanced toward the waiting aides behind him, then back to Hugh. "I get it. The whole silent treatment. You're not supposed to talk." Still nothing. Trump nodded slowly. Well, whatever they're paying you, double it. From across the forecourt, a laugh broke out. Someone covered their mouth. Trump didn't flinch this time. He half smiled. Then came the part no one expected. He stepped closer, just to the edge of the rope line, and looked directly at Hugh. And again, with the same brief, unmistakable motion he'd used earlier, he raised his hand in salute. This time it was clearer, slower, intentional. A salute not from one soldier to another. Trump had never served, but from one man to another man who had just refused to disappear. Hugh didn't return it. He couldn't. But he met Trump's eyes, just for a second. That was enough. Trump lowered his hand, gave a nod and turned away without another word. Back at the rope line, a young staffer murmured, "Did that just happen?" Miss Dalton, standing beside him, didn't answer, but the corners of her mouth lifted. Slightly. It wasn't history, not the kind that would be taught in schools or quoted in speeches, but it was something. A ripple, not a wave. A moment that wouldn't trend globally, but would be whispered between people who were there, passed on in pubs and post rooms, shared between colleagues who needed a reason to believe that stillness could still win. Inside, as the summit reconvened, someone showed the video to a delegate from Canada. He watched it, blinked twice and murmured, "That's not nothing." And later, when the press photos came in, editors noticed something strange. Trump had smiled in all of them, but not once did he ask for the guard to be cropped out again. He stayed in the frame, right where he belonged, and in the background, never moving, never posing, stood a soldier in scarlet red, the man Trump had tried to erase. Now the most immovable part of the picture. The shift ended at 1300 hours, right on the dot, as it always did. The ceremonial relief arrived with precise footfalls, boots striking stone in perfect sync. The quiet command exchanged between officers just out of public earshot. Lance Corporal Hugh Mercer held his position as the relieving guards took formation, his eyes forward until the very moment his replacement stood beside him. Only then did he step away, measured, deliberate, and march back through the palace gates and toward the interior corridor that led to the guards' barracks. He didn't look back. He never did. Once inside, the ceremonial stillness cracked slightly. The corridor was dim, narrow, the muffled sounds of distant foot traffic and rattling storage lockers echoing through its walls. Hugh walked past a line of benches and hooks, finally reaching his locker. The bearskin came off first, held carefully, not tossed. Then the gloves, folded once, then again. Every movement carried the precision of ritual. A familiar voice spoke from behind. "Didn't think I'd see the day," said Corporal Liam Rowntree, a younger guard, with just 3 years in. Hugh turned slightly, one eyebrow raised. "You spoke?" Liam said, grinning. "In uniform, on post, in front of a foreign head of state." "I was authorized," Hugh replied, deadpan. "No doubt," Liam said, still half laughing. "But still, we thought you were carved out of marble." Hugh allowed the faintest ghost of a smile. "Just a long shift." He didn't offer more, but that wasn't new. The barracks knew Hugh as the quiet one. Reliable, professional, a bit of a relic, some said, but the kind that could stand when others folded. He changed out of his tunic slowly, methodically. The red wool was damp from the warmth of the day, the kind of heat that clung to skin long after the uniform came off. He reached up into the top shelf of his locker and pulled down a small canvas pouch. Military issue, old. Inside was a photo. His grandfather in full ceremonial dress, standing outside Windsor Castle. Behind him, handwritten in ink, "Hold your ground, even when they don't see you." Hugh sat for a moment on the wooden bench, holding the photo in one hand, gloves in the other. The buzz from outside, the conversations, the theories, the reaction, none of it reached him here. What had happened wasn't about going viral. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about knowing when presence is more powerful than protest. About recognizing that in a world spinning ever faster, sometimes the most radical act is simply not to move. He heard a knock at the barracks door, then a pause, then it creaked open slightly. "Mercer?" came a voice, quiet, unfamiliar. He stood. A junior staffer from the Foreign Office stepped in, holding a sealed envelope. "From General Lockridge," the man said. Hugh took it silently. The staffer gave a brief, respectful nod and left without further word. Inside the envelope, a single card, no signature, no crest, just 6 words, written in tight, deliberate hand. "You said more than they ever do." Hugh folded the card and slipped it behind the photo in the pouch. He returned both to the shelf and closed the locker with a gentle click. He didn't need to tell anyone what was inside. Some things were meant to be carried, not displayed. And as he stepped outside into the low afternoon light, buttoning his civilian jacket over a plain undershirt, he moved with the same posture he always had, shoulders square, chin lifted, silence intact. Whatever storm had stirred today, it had passed. And the man who had weathered it? He was already walking forward. So here's what I want to know. If you were standing in that guard's boots, would you have stayed silent? Or would you have spoken like Hugh did? And do you think Trump meant that salute? Or was it just another moment for the cameras? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. If this story reminded you why silence can sometimes speak the loudest, go ahead and tap that like button. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell on. We post a brand new Royal Guard story every single day. And if you know someone who thinks these guards are just for show, send them this video. Other stories are already appearing on your screen. Click one now, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with another story that proves tradition doesn't flinch, it stands.